Are you struggling to bring life into your portraits? Maybe you're stuck in the grid method, or you're just unable to get those correct proportions. Many artists find proportions and likeness to be the toughest challenges. In this video, we'll tackle the biggest mistakes that's holding you back so you can create more accurate and expressive portraits, breaking free from the frustrations and turning it into passion. I applied these methods to transform and create my own unique style. Now I help aspiring and charcoal artists come off the grid method so they feel connected to their work, master proportions so they have the confidence to take on those commissions, and develop their style so they build a body of work to feel proud of. Let's dive in. Drawing what you see. Seems like an obvious one, I know, but it's one of the most common mistakes I see. Because portraits have so much information that it can show us, it's so easy to get lost in knowing what to look at, what to focus on, where to start. Should you start with the eyes? Should you start with the nose? Should you start with the values? Truth is, there isn't one right way in drawing. There's just more easier ways and more difficult ways. And depending on how you approach it, some will have more advantages and some won't have as many advantages. And it also really depends on your level and experience, mixed with what you actually want to achieve in your work, mixed with the actual reference itself. With this reference, it being one of the most famous paintings out there, my goal is to create my own version while still keeping the style of the original painting, which is why I build a base structure first and then immediately put my core shadows on afterwards. Because by approaching it this way, it gives me the easiest setup for my beginning stages. With other drawings you would have seen me do, sometimes I start with the eyes or I start from the inside out, but that's because with those drawings I'm confident with what I'm doing because the reference itself is giving me easy access to navigate around the portrait. But because this portrait is just so incredibly smooth and subtle, I'm approaching it this way to give me the best possible start in creating a good, secure foundation to then build on. You'll see through the video that the features themselves are one of the last things that I actually do instead of the first. And that's because of how this reference looks. It's really easy to start to assume what things look like. I'm 34 years old, so I've had 34 years of just seeing people's faces. So I've built up this idea of what a portrait looks like, consciously or subconsciously. And being an artist who specializes in portraits, it's more consciously. But it's with those memories and those general blanket rules of drawing, such as there's an eye's width in between the eyes. It's those thoughts that will trip you up. As soon as you start thinking like that, the quicker you will start to lose the likeness of your subject, because now you're drawing what you think you see rather than what you actually see. Now, we don't also just want to replicate the entire piece, because then you're not putting any creativity of yourself in there. So you want to draw what you see, but also interpret what you feel. Now, this being more of a master study than an actual portfolio piece, I'm keeping it basically the same apart from the background and the edge of the headdress. But when it comes to my showcase pieces, I balance my focal point with implied forms, and I have more tight rendered areas balanced with more soft and suggested areas. But it's all still drawing what I see while interpreting what I feel. I'm a very visual person, so I don't like using the Loomis method or the Riley method. That doesn't mean that those methods aren't good, but I find literally drawing what I see is the best and most effective method, which is why I view everything in a very structural way. It means that there's no guesswork. As long as you reduce the information you are seeing into very basic large shapes of value and you have your connection points, that then gives you all the base information that you need in the most simple way for you to build on. Now, there is a technical aspect to it because you are literally building a structural template for the portrait, and each portrait has its own structure. But once you are confident and fluent in seeing those shapes and connection points, all of a sudden the process of putting it together becomes extremely freeing and fluent. One of my students went from doing one portrait every month to like 3 or 4 in a week. He laughed because he said he's running out of people to draw. Another student told me the other day that she's had a breakthrough and her latest piece not only took a lot less time, but it also was a lot easier and smooth because she started to simplify what she was seeing at the beginning stages, starting broad and working in and leaving all the minor adjustments at the very end instead of the very beginning. She got comfortable with it not looking good at the very beginning and going through that process and seeing it develop in the later stages. which sounds strange because you would think if it looked good at the beginning, it would be easier and take less time, but it's the opposite. If you try to make it look good at the very beginning, you end up just running around in circles chasing your tail trying to make it look perfect. And you make no progression with the portrait because you're focusing on the very tiny aspects that aren't important at that point. But if you approach it by starting broad, keeping it simple and accepting that it's not meant to look good at the beginning and going through the process of building the value, using the shadow and light shapes to refine the structure and then refine the features when you have successfully built your foundation. That's how you put a portrait together, not just in a more successful way, but in an easier and quicker time frame. And in my students' case, going from 1 portrait a month to like 3 in a week. This also means when you have that confidence and freedom to create work in a shorter time frame, you get to practice those challenges that a portrait has a lot more, which then leads to quicker progression as well. I have a whole video talking more about this in more detail. I'll leave a link in the description so you can watch it. Values over details. More realistic doesn't mean more likeness. It just means more realistic. Less can often say more, but how do you say more but with less? It's not so much you are putting less into the portrait, it's more you are shifting the focus from the details to the values. Details don't create likeness, values do. I like to view that there are only 3 key factors to make a portrait: structure, value, and details. And out of those 3 factors, values are by far the most important and hold the most weight to a portrait. Then it goes structure, and then it's the details. You could even just get rid of details entirely and just have the values and structure, but sometimes it's nice adding extra details in because it can be quite fun. But in terms of excessive rendering or trying to capture every tiny detail, that isn't where likeness comes from, it's the value. And I come from 20 years of hyperrealism, so I'm very well versed in capturing every tiny detail and what it contributes into a portrait. And at that point, you're just adding pixels to an already lifelike portrait. This portrait here is such a great example of how values do all the heavy lifting and how details literally have absolutely nothing to do with it. And that's because there's literally 0 details in it. Everything, and I mean everything, has really subtle transitions of value. There's no prominent edges or textures within the portrait that you can use to help navigate your way around it. There's no definition in any of the features, so you can't just draw the features on. They need to be found through slowly layering and saturating the values. There's no hair, there's no eyelashes, there's no wrinkles. There's literally nothing to use to help navigate around the face apart from the shadows. There's no highlights on the face, it's either a shadow value or a light value, which is why there's no edge on the nose or the lips. It's basically just a clean sheet of ice. You have to trust yourself in pushing through a light value all the way through the face. Because it's so subtle, it kind of feels like you're going against your instinct by doing so. But again, if you actually truly look at the reference, the only white areas are within the eye and above her shoulder. Now most of the time, if not basically all the time, there's never white in the eyes. We just associate that eyes are white because in terms of color, they are. But in terms of value, they're not. But in this painting, they basically are. So if you compare her eyes to her skin tone, even though you think there might be highlights in her skin tone, in comparison to her eyes, it's clearly a shade darker. I'm not saying it's a dark shade, but a darker shade in comparison. So that highlight that you think you see on her nose isn't actually there. This is why this portrait is such a great test of drawing what you actually see instead of what you think you see, and trusting the process of just focusing on the values, as the values will not only do the heavy lifting for you, but it will also capture the person's likeness. It's through those values that will also guide you into finding where you can place your features more accurately without it looking like a caricature. It requires patience and trusting the process, because every part of you wants to jump in and place those features on because it's a portrait and portraits have eyes. But if you're working with a piece that is as soft and as subtle as this, you can't do that, because you need to make sure the surrounding areas of values are locked in first, because that's going to give you that security in placing your features in a more accurate way. There would be no way in approaching this portrait in the same way that I have done with previous drawings. Something that I really almost bore myself with when I'm talking to my students, and it's values over details, because I cannot stress enough how important values are when it comes to a portrait. It's the life and the soul in any drawing that you will do. And this portrait was a perfect representation of that. And it was fun to do because it literally forced my hand to focus on the most important key factors of the portrait. If you want to know more about my mentorship program and working with me so you can transform your work, gain confidence as an artist, and build a body of work that you're proud of, I'll leave a link in the description to book a call. I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.